So I'm Abigail Carl Clausen. I'm here today with Veronica Enns, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her experiences in the Campos Mennonitas de Chihuahua, and also her experiences as an artist. So thank you so much for participating.
Thank you, Abigail, for interviewing me.
So just to start us off, briefly introduce yourself.
Well, I am Veronica Enns, like Abigail said, and I am an artist, visual artist here in the Campos Mennonitas. I did live in Canada for many years, and that's where I formally had some art education. But my roots being here in the Campos, I came back and want to promote the artistic culture here.
And so tell us a little bit about your family history and what daily life was like for you growing up here in the Campos.
Okay, family history. Well, when I grew up, which is several decades ago, the time without the internet, and we didn't have any media. In fact, like newspapers or radios, all those things in those years were even forbidden. So it was a very primitive and, in a way, almost a hippie-like lifestyle, where we just were living from the land, running bare feet. I had a bunch of chickens as my pets. I would make sure I took care of them. Of course, we had school, private school, and then otherwise the housework and helping your mom with the kids, the rest of the siblings, was very important. Was more important than the homework.
Yeah.
So first had to be done all that. And then if we had free time before dinner, then we would do our homework. And it's actually very interesting because homework was something you looked forward to do. And normally in these days, kids would say, "Oh, I don't want to do my homework."
Yeah.
For us, it was very special because we knew that many kids didn't have that level of private school we had. So it was almost like a special treat to go and do our homework.
Yeah. And so you didn't attend a traditional school in the DARP. Talk a little bit about what your schooling was like.
Okay, my schooling was private school, which was in German, High German. You started at first grade. In those years, there was no kindergarten. And it was all with German textbooks. At level, in the fourth year, that's when some of the public school system of the state of Chihuahua was introduced. And otherwise, it was like a typical school system that would be considered public. The traditional schools in the Mennonite campus would just be reading the Bible and the Testament and the Catechismus, which I didn't have those roots, but my mom does.
Yeah. And then in secondary school, was that primarily in Spanish or?
My dad decided to take us out of the private school at level 4th. So I finished my 3rd in elementary, and then cuarto, which is the 4th, in a small town, Rubio, here, which was very close to my parents' house. We just moved from our farm to the more commercial road. So it was more practical and convenient, and my dad wanted us to speak Spanish. Yeah. So then all of it started in Spanish.
And so at the time that you made that transition to the school in Rubio, was that a common thing for Mennonite families to be doing, or?
No, only one cousin before us had done that in Bachiniva, which is a smaller town than Rubio. So being the only ones, her and her sisters, and my dad liked the concept, and so in Rubio we were the very first ones ever to be Mennonites in a public Spanish school. So we were looked up as interesting people. Like it was very interesting. I didn't speak a word of Spanish, and I had the best place in the first year already, just because we came with so much more discipline.
Yeah, for sure.
And it was very different to be that Mennonite. The next year, more than 10 Mennonite kids started going to the same school. But my dad was the one that pushed the limits to say, okay, I will take the risk and send my kids to public school.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was not normal, and we were looked down upon. Many things were said that the risks and the consequences that would come with going to public school.
Yeah.
That we might marry a Mexican, and that we would get in touch with the world, and we wouldn't know the difference between the good and bad anymore.
Yeah. And so during that time, when you were growing up, what was a typical level of interaction between the Mennonite community and the outside community?
Well, for being a woman, for the women, hardly none. Only if you go into the town, which for most villages would be a 30-minute drive, or to a rancho to buy just the basic level of groceries.
Yeah.
The interaction would be saying thank you to the cashier.
Yeah.
And normally going to the bigger town, you go with your husband or your uncle.
For sure.
And even for the men, it would be the basic business that you have to do.
Yeah.
But otherwise, the Mennonite Campos are very self-sufficient in the everyday.
Yeah.
They rely on selling their crops to the outside, but the women are definitely protected. They have hardly anything to do. Maybe cooking lunch for their workers.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if they would at that time sit inside. They might have just been sitting outside and eating their lunch.
Yeah.
So that's kind of that's why a lot of women don't speak Spanish even till this day. My mom's generation doesn't speak Spanish.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's one of the first cross-cultural interactions that you can remember from growing up? Something that kind of sticks out in your mind?
Well, the ladies selling products that would drive from neighbor to neighbor trying to sell us something, which was always very interesting because they knew we didn't speak our language, so they would act it out and show us clothes. This is for sale, and they would put it on or try us to put it on, and they wanted to sell it to us.
Yeah.
There was a lot of signing and acting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And otherwise, my first would have been going to, because I was only 13 years old when I entered public school. So that's what I remember more, that
for sure.
It was the first few months was just signing and a lot of action to communicate what I wanted and needed to do.
Yeah.
And just have a little extra coins to buy chocolate or treats to make friends.
Yeah, absolutely.
Make sure we have friends.
Absolutely. And taking in like all of that information just kind of in that short amount of time. And just, okay, like gotta.
Yeah. Overwhelming, and we weren't used to taking all our material home every day. Yeah. Because nobody would ever break in or steal anything from the classrooms in the campus. In fact, we never had our doors closed. There was never an issue of someone strange walking into a place. Yeah. And even the first year we had to buy, I remember buying 5 or 6 calculators because they would just disappear and disappear. Yeah, for sure. A sneak, and that was something we didn't know, which is not the most positive experience, but we were not upset. We were just, okay, we'll buy another calculator. Yeah, for sure. And we knew that, suddenly we became popular because we didn't go back and attack someone. And so we were very cool kids for having calculators repeatedly and pencils and cool things that maybe they never had. Yeah, absolutely. So there's a cultural difference of basic needs that a lot of kids in the small towns don't have. Yeah. So we were looked up as more privileged. Yeah, absolutely. So you grew up in a very conservative community, but have since transitioned into a different lifestyle, both in dress and ideology. Describe your transition process and your motivations for that transition. Okay, a lot of it was, of the transitions were, in the childhood and youth were decided by the parents. A lot of it has to do with churches and the denomination. Yeah. The preacher would say this is okay as far as the dress code. And then if your parents agree, then if they didn't agree, then they said, you know what, we will move on to another denomination. Yeah. And it usually revolves around the female dress. Yeah, for sure. As far as identification or image. Yeah. Where you belong to. So Yeah, in my childhood, we moved churches 7 times.
Yeah.
Just because there was disagreements, and usually around the female dress.
Yeah.
And how to be an example for the more traditional, to attract the conservative Mennonites, to show them something new, a better light, be a better light. But it usually had to be the woman showing that, okay, look, this is how we dress, and this is what we mean.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, and it was very confusing because this was strictly forbidden, and then suddenly it's not, and then it was something else that was not forbidden.
Yeah.
Before suddenly became, we had to go back, or sometimes we jumped.
Yeah.
Which was confusing.
Yeah. And what were some of those specific things that that would be kind of like a sticking point, like?
Well, how much skin you show on your sleeves, or the measurement of your skirt, for sure. But often it was the glitz and the glamour, the shiny button, or the pointy shoe. It had to be a round shoe.
Yeah.
Suddenly, well, makeup was always forbidden.
Yeah.
And hair, like any coloring or trying to manipulate.
Yeah.
I never had to wear head coverings.
Yeah.
That was already my mom's life. But
because they transitioned out of the old colony, I guess, before you were born.
Mom from the old colony, and then when she married my father into the Kleingemeinde. From there they went to the German Church of God. But then there was also a branch where they went out of that. And that's split a few times as well. So there was always, well, the rules of the female behavior.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And what have been some of the negative as well as positive reactions from family and community, those shifts that you've made?
Well, you lost friends. Suddenly you had to give up a friend that you would have never... Well, you were a friend. Yeah. If it was a cousin, even that meant, so you're cousins, but you're not going to stay at their house anymore. Yeah. Because we're not going to the same church. Yeah. For example, when I was still in the private school, we had to participate with the choirs and the, for example, Mother's Day programs. But then we had to practice, but the day off, we wouldn't go. Yeah. And so that was hard because you knew the whole time practicing a song or a poem, you would not be able to say it in front of the audience because you could not step into another church. The physical space was already cheating on your new church.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was very strict. Yeah. And the positive, well, we learned how to be very independent. Yeah. And not stay in the same group and be comfortable, and because all of us who went through that process of changing churches, like there's always a few families sticking together. Yeah. We're actually the innovators, all of them. Yeah. The ones that I can say we're innovators, we're independent thinkers, and maybe even more compassionate because we've been through a lot of steps of...
Yeah, absolutely.
I see someone struggle and I'm like, oh, they're just in that phase that I know I was in too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So not become too comfortable in one step. Yeah.
And so what have been some challenges and some opportunities of kind of navigating these conservative and liberal communities?
Well, the challenges, growing up that isolated, not physically necessarily, but isolated as in we were a very, very small congregation. We were not allowed to socialize with other people. Yeah. Meant to occupy yourself with things all the time and not need someone else. Yeah. That was often a challenge because especially in the age of adolescence, you want to meet people, you're curious, you want to date. Yeah. Everyone else was dating. Yeah. And you couldn't because in your congregation you were always, you were related to everybody. Yeah. Yeah. And so that was definitely a challenge because, it took me a long time to forgive my family for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they admit that it was a mistake, that for them it was an absolute right, that the community wasn't a fit for us, but then at the same time we're living here. Yeah. So what are we going to do about
Yeah, exactly.
about this. So,
Yeah.
and opportunities, I'm not sure if there was any opportunities in this, in that of being so isolated. But my dad always had a business, so there was public in the office, and the office was located at my parents' place.
Yeah.
So that was my escape to, and also public school. We were in public school while we were in that small, very, very small, isolated church.
Yeah.
So we were allowed to be friendly to the Mexicans and friendly to people, but not socialize on free time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think academically it was an opportunity. We grew more. I knew what I wanted to study. I knew what I wanted to be.
Yeah.
Learning later that it was forbidden to go to school, but at least you could dream about it in your mind. And be self-sufficient. Be know what you want and not rely so much on peer pressure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because this small community can become very claustrophobic sometimes with someone else saying, "Oh, you really want to do this? I suggest you not." And you could just say, "Okay, I trust you," and not. We learned how to question everything.
Yeah.
Which gives you opportunities in real life, in the future.
Yeah. And so, like you said, you're an artist you're working in ceramics and painting. Your studio is located here at Cabañas Las Bellotas in Campo 10. Tell us a little bit about your community's relationship with art growing up, particularly what kinds of creative expressions were accepted and forbidden.
Okay. I'm fascinated with the Campos Mennonitas. And also for as long as I remember, I was always looking through my mom's little kiste to see the drawings of my grandma. That was always in cards or front cover of books. Little boxes had a little drawing or an old clock, a Russian clock. And they were always floral, tea towels. And my grandma used to do the drawings for the children's books. And so that was a treasure. My mom didn't let me see them much. I could rarely pick up, and I was very inspired by that, and I would always draw and sketch and doodle on a daily basis. And there was never a topic of forbidden because our community is so primitive and basic. It's all about surviving, especially here in Mexico. Very harsh environments, and one year you have a good crop, next year the government has no way to pay you, so you never know. So art is a luxury to the point where there's no question, will you be an artist or not? You just have talent, you know how to draw, that's great. But not in a sense of a career or say somebody will say, "Can you draw this for me?" and I will pay you for that. It was more like always like a hobby. And you would just do it because it's a talent of yours. And I didn't know any artists other than maybe illustrators of the tea towels, of more or less copying what already existed, maybe from Russia. There's a lot of ifs because we have nothing documented.
Absolutely.
And or copying another artist and just say, "Look, I can draw the same thing as them. And look how beautiful it is. It's almost identical." And then it means you have a great talent. But the concept of art is, I think, just setting root now.
And you've talked a little bit before about the craft work, particularly of women, and how that's inspired like your artwork. Give some examples of some of that.
Well, the craft work is all the things that the women make. They have a designated jobs, and maybe nobody tells them to do it, but it's taken for granted that women will obviously do all the cooking. And I find it sculptural when they make cookies and Veronica. Because ceramics is the same. It's modeling, and I want this to happen, and this is what I do. And I think most women here take it as a chore and a job. It's nothing that they enjoy. Some do, but I almost permit myself to say that every woman is expected to run a certain level of housekeeping and the homemaking that they have to do.
Yeah.
And traditionally, most women do the tea towels. They will have drawings that somebody passed on, or it's just a tradition to do the same drawings.
Yeah.
And stitch them. And very interesting color choices, not chosen by them. It's typical to use fluorescent colors with muted colors, which I find very interesting because I asked my auntie once if she could do just the black and white for me. I wanted a white towel with a black stitching, and she threw it all away. She added all her bright colors, and then I respected her because I knew this is a tradition now.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is more than just, I'm going to do this. There's actually a tradition that you have to use bright colors.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that is the craftsmanship is in the kitchen and the items that you're using in the kitchen.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of wall art in typical houses, the traditional houses. And if here it's purchased, it's common stuff, not hand painted by locals. It would be. Nowadays, it's all commercialized.
For sure.
If you like something, I will buy it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you immigrated to Canada as a young woman. What role did migration play in the formation of your creative process and identity?
Well, it was a culture shock. The moving from the small town that in those years as well, those 2002, I didn't even have an email account. We didn't have, internet just came years later. And it felt like leaving everything behind. I'm moving away, so I lost a lot of contact. It was calling home maybe every 2 weeks with my mom. I would speak. My father, not so much, because it's not a tradition to call both parents. It's more, you talk to your mom. Because you're the daughter and you can talk to your mom. So I would be informed about the things that go on here. And otherwise it was a new world. And it was very hard to transition because we had been brought up with such strict rules about what women do and what they don't do and how to dress and not to dress. And going to Canada, all of that was not applied, and nobody else in the congregation that I was going to did do any of that.
And not just Canada, but Vancouver. You moved to the big city.
The big city. And one example, a beautiful woman, we had been taught not to wear even pants. So we believed in not wearing pants. And here I go to Canada, and this beautiful lady, 65 years old, wears the shortest shorts and is adorable and is so friendly to me. And I literally could not make eye contact with her because I felt she was the biggest cheater of all times. Because this is not fair. Our preacher, the same preacher, told us not to do this. And now she is doing it. Why and why and why? And silly questions. But when you're in that culture shock, for me, it was religious to follow the rules. And now here, why is it like this?
Yeah, absolutely.
That culture shock really took me years to get over. And I would stay the Mennonite that I was in Mexico, in Vancouver. Where nobody cared if I did it or not. But I had to do it for myself.
Absolutely.
A process.
So talk a little bit about your educational and artistic training that you received in Canada.
Well, being the artist, from the previous question, the creative, the culture shock was kind of an obstacle for a few years to say, okay, I'm going back to school, because here in Mexico, I was not allowed to go back to, I couldn't even finish high school. I stayed home 3 years. So I was promised that in Canada, I could continue my education. But not knowing how challenging it is to say, okay, I have a little education from a town called Rubio that's as most isolated as any small town can be. And now I want to continue in Vancouver, in the world city.
So in English.
And in English. I didn't speak English at all when I moved to Canada. So I had to start, always say I started as a kindergarten, as an adult. And for us, being 19 years old, it meant I'm really an adult, I'm responsible, I should be this person that knows what she's doing. And now starting from so small, it was very intimidating for me.
Yeah.
I felt it was very challenging, and I felt belittled.
Yeah.
Because now I had to go and upgrade English and learn English, and not just learn it. Once I had upgraded for a few years, I had to start upgrading the basics in math, all of it, just to start a college level course. Yeah. And that took me years. Yeah. And I wanted to be an accountant because I was told in Mexico that I should be an accountant. And so the question of being an artist wasn't even in there. And in that time, the family I had, they knew my talent, but they also knew that artists not necessarily have a good paying job, so accountant was encouraged. Yeah. But at that level already, in the second year of upgrading English, I was told, do you even understand what you need to be an accountant here in Canada? You will upgrade here for another 5 years. Basically, that's not in the question. Yeah. And then I said, okay, what can I do with what I have now so that I can finally take some college courses? Because the English was a self-paced upgrading. Yeah. So I wasn't socializing. I was sitting in a room with more immigrants and just staring at a book and reading it. And I was so very, like a Mennonite, punctual. I was there at 9 in the morning and left at 5 in the afternoon because I was upgrading. Yeah. But on my own, reading a language I didn't know and just staring at the book, and I was supposed to write an essay. Yeah. So it was very intense, very frustrating. I did that for 3 years until I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I don't know where this is going to take me. Yeah. It was more or less to spend time away from, I needed to feel important that I was doing something. Yeah. But then I wanted to study. And then finally, the only thing I could get into was fine arts. Well, luckily I loved arts. Yeah. And then I decided to do a portfolio. I prepared a portfolio in a few days because it was a last-minute decision for application. And I got in the fast-track program. And then I finally said goodbye to upgrading English. Yeah. I still struggled in art classes because it's a different environment altogether.
And a whole new vocabulary and everything.
And popular culture was something I had not learned in upgrading English. Yeah. So here for sure. Was another culture shock. But then it was more, I was doing things and learning it with it, not just staring at a book and looking at the dictionary, every other word. Yeah. And I had to interpret all of it on my own. And here it was with people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And creative people.
Absolutely.
So it was the first time doing anything creative in Vancouver in an art school. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah. And what were some of the skills that you learned there that you find most valuable in your work now?
To think for yourself. Yeah. Because that was not allowed in our culture. You don't ask questions. You do not ask whys. You just always follow orders. That's what we do best. And that's why accounting would have been good. Yeah. 1 + 1. But here it was challenged from day one. Yeah. And I was always, I would come home and say, the teacher said, or the professor said, that we were not allowed to draw anything pretty to hang on our grandmother's couch above. It had to be meaningful, and why are you making this? And the critiques in class, we got dissected our work to the smallest thing, and we had to talk about it. Yeah. And mine was always out of context because I wouldn't understand the project most of the time. Oh, but it became usually the most interesting painting because they didn't know why is this so lost. This piece is so different. Yeah. And then at least I shared. I was very open to share, and then it became a very interesting art afterwards. Yeah. So I moved freely in the classes and always had a good standing in arts. Yeah. From the beginning.
Absolutely. You talk a lot about art as therapy. In that time in Vancouver, how were the arts therapeutic for you?
Well, art therapy in that time, our college was supposed to get the program, one of the first in Canada, to offer a degree in art therapy. And I had never heard about it, but then as it was explained, I loved it immediately because I felt that is why I did art. Mm-hmm. Because growing up, I don't remember thinking I'm going to be this great artist, or mm-hmm. I'd never heard about a name or an artist mm-hmm. or why they made art, or even seen artwork. Yeah. That was part of art school, was art history, which mm-hmm. I really loved. Yeah. But then unfortunately our college didn't get the program, mm-hmm. but I loved ceramics because it was the only material where I felt there was also therapy. Yeah. And maybe very functional, hands-on, mm-hmm. with less thinking, like the painting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or any of the academic art subjects, which I loved. I took them because they challenged me, mm-hmm. but my essays were always failing because mm-hmm. my English wasn't good enough. Mm-hmm. It was language barrier. For sure, yeah. Or even the topics, because I wouldn't understand the assignment. So I would have my own argument about something nobody else understood, because I was talking, not irrelevant, but mm-hmm. it was something that the professor would not understand what I was talking about. Yeah. So there was a cultural shock in that. Absolutely. In the sense of essay writing. Yeah. It was English, and she would say, I don't know, you're writing it well, but I just don't understand it. Your sentence is fine, your grammar is good, but I don't understand what you're talking about. Yeah. Well, I'm trying to understand, but mm-hmm. I didn't have anyone to go to ask for help that was Mennonite or could help me. Yeah, kind of like frame like your cultural perspective like to an outsider. Yeah. Yeah. So that was the most frustrating part of art school. Yeah. But then in the therapy in ceramics, mm-hmm. my professor, he knew Mennonites. Yeah. And he knew Mata Ortiz from Chihuahua. So it clicked to me. Yeah. Okay, and I'm staying here. And so I would often repeat a class, mm-hmm. even if I didn't get a credit, because I wanted to do more in ceramics, learn more, and with a little less intense thinking, which now I would love to take more art history and write more. Yeah. But in that time I needed the therapy part because culture shock was too intense. Yeah, absolutely. So, and then I thought this would be great to continue as an art therapist mm-hmm. for other people who are going through any kind of challenges and culture shocks, that art can help greatly to also find yourself and mm-hmm. why are you doing something. And now why do I choose this color and this shape? Yeah. There's always a reason for it. Yeah. So when you were living in Canada, you also were trained as a phlebotomist. Talk a little bit about that. Oh yeah, well, now that I still needed some electives to graduate as that I worked very, very hard on my Diploma of Arts, which would be a piece of cake for any Canadian student. For me, it was like a post-graduate kind of project. That's mm-hmm, how much mm-hmm. intensity I believe personally I put in. Yeah, because it was learning a lifetime of information mm-hmm. that someone else could have gotten in high school and for sure, or in even like squeezing all that information into a very small space. Yeah, in a new language, in a new culture. Mm-hmm. So there was a time when, what do I want to do with this? Mm-hmm. And what can I do with a Diploma of Art? Well, mm-hmm. nothing, not in Vancouver. Yeah. You can sweep somebody's art studio for the rest of your life, was one answer of my professor. And they would say, here in Vancouver, I don't know anyone at the age of not even, you have to be 40 or above, mm-hmm. who can start a career in art as an independent artist. Yeah. And I thought to myself, and what do I want to paint about? Or what really do I have to say that here I am this artist? Yeah. Yes, I do have talent, and I had a very good GPA, mm-hmm. a great one. I was always on honor roll. Mm-hmm. But what does it help me if I don't know financially how we'll support this? Yeah. And I was sick of always having to ask for money, how to pay everything. Because it was a full-time. I took 5 courses, and I was definitely a full-time housewife.
Yeah.
Because I was a Mennonite.
Yeah.
And I would always have my house full of people.
Yeah.
So I was like running 2 things, but nothing to get money.
Yeah, exactly.
So I looked into another opportunity and what is the demand, and it was social worker.
Yeah.
Or nurse assistant.
Yeah.
Or this laboratory assistant.
Yeah.
And I was enrolled, and I didn't even know what I was going to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the course was paid for or financed.
Yeah.
And I had not known that I would ever have to draw blood and use a needle.
Yeah.
So I was like, had I known that, I would definitely not apply for this. But here I was, no choice, and I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
And I did.
Yeah.
And I actually enjoyed it because it was, again, just overcoming something I felt important.
Yeah.
And now I could apply for a real job, and which didn't take me long. And I started working at important companies and meeting the everyday people in the country, not just the art students or the ones that sit in the universities.
Yeah.
So it was great to see, to make contact with my neighbors and people.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned before, like, that's where you really felt like you got your, like, financial independence was there.
I needed that after so many years that I would often have to call home and ask for money to pay art supplies.
Yeah.
And my family did support me, but I think everyone thought it was just a hobby. And she needs to do this so she feels important.
There's just like a phase, like eventually.
She will go and work at a restaurant and something like that.
Yeah.
Which was always a choice for me, but I promised myself that I needed to have something more than a basic job. And I think a basic job is great for an immigrant because it breaks a lot of boundaries and ice. And I was already in Canada for, I think, 5 or 6 years, and I had never had a real job. So it would have been great to work at McDonald's and Tim Hortons and just to feel like a normal person, because I spoke a language that was English, but it was the instructive English, and I couldn't converse with a person on the street. So there was another level of culture shock.
For sure.
That was, different lifestyle has different language. So.
And kind of during that time, just at different times, integrating yourselves into those different, like, parts of the culture. Because
most of the friends in Vancouver from the congregations didn't have jobs, but would have a very high level of intellectual academics under their belt, intimidating me a lot. Like, I need to be like them, and I should try to aim at the same thing, but they had always been in Canada, so different scenario.
Absolutely.
So I felt I always said I felt like a very low-class person in my that congregation, and when I moved away from it, I felt like a very important person, because there were ordinary people in Vancouver as well, not just incredibly highly, but doctor degrees and you name it.
So you recently, I think 5 years ago, moved back to Mexico after many years of living in Canada. What was the transition back to life in the Campos like? And how has this move impact your art and creative process?
Well, being in Vancouver, knowing that my art career would possibly never take flight, I was thinking, what can I do, or could I do with my art in my hometown? And I wasn't sure if I wanted to move back, because it takes almost 10 years to be a citizen or feel comfortable when it's such a different culture. And I just started to enjoy the everyday and working, but for Vancouver, that job was still a very basic entry-level job. With just giving you enough to pay your bills and a very basic rent. which would not give you a lot of freedom to do art.
Yeah, absolutely.
And be very exhausted.
Yeah.
And so my work would be an hour or two commuting one way, plus full-time. And it takes a long time to even get a full-time job. So it's not, like, depending on what you need financially, and the rent is very high in Vancouver.
Yeah.
You had to live in a very basic place if you wanted to do this on your own.
Yeah.
And there was a level of exhaustion to the point where, no, I cannot see myself do this for the rest of my life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would start complaining about it to my parents, like, I don't know how I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
If I will be able to do this for the rest of my life. And so slowly they started inviting me back here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we can offer you, at least some time to relax and then see what other opportunities we can give you here.
Yeah.
Maybe work in the office for the family or...
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, maybe I can do some art just in the sense of therapy to deal with so many years of stress.
Yeah.
And so finally I made that decision after a few years of working as a phlebotomist.
Yeah.
But then the culture shock was very big. But I had always traveled back in between, almost once a year.
Yeah.
So I saw how the community was becoming more worldly in the sense of there is radio, there is music now, there's popular culture even in the young generation. And my siblings, they grew up way more normal.
Yeah.
What in the sense of not so restricted away from everything. So I knew what I was coming back to.
Yeah.
But still the thinking and what's accepted and not is very strong at the time when I came back.
Yeah.
Even the last 5 years have changed a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It gave me at least in the sense, what if I make art and start sharing it on social media? And social media is very used by young kids here.
Yeah.
And most of my followers are young Mennonites on my Instagram account.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it feels like there's at least the opportunity to inspire.
Yeah.
And so I'm known now, after 5 years, I'm known as the artist in the Campos, and moms want me to teach their kids the basic drawing or some ceramics, which is very rewarding. And I didn't even anticipate that. I thought that wasn't going to be the case. I would just make art for myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe share it in the city.
Yeah.
But not in the Campos Mennonitas.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you talked a little bit about some moms wanting you to offer children art classes. What are some other creative and community projects that you're doing both here in the Campos and then in the city?
Okay, there's a lot of opportunities with events from the side of the government, because social media is great as well when you want an audience to engage with your work. There's the way of tagging.
Yeah.
So I've often tagged the Department of Tourism, and they have acknowledged my work. I've often tagged a popular one for the Estado de Chihuahua. They have seen my work, they've shared my work.
Yeah.
And that they speak around and then they make contacts, or they ask you to create a project. As far as the here in the Campos, just find more makers and more artists and see how you can communicate. And I've given some classes by request on a private manner.
Yeah.
I've never been asked to teach art in any private school here. Possibly because I'm maybe too free, a very independent person, or a free thinker. And that could be the reason. Or perhaps because there's never been art taught in these schools.
Yeah.
And it has never been challenged. No one has ever said, why don't we have art classes?
Yeah.
There's maybe some crafting, but not as an art.
Yeah.
And it's not a career that exists or can... There's no practical, functional purpose for a Mennonite, local Mennonite, about why would you make this? You know, what's the purpose? Does it bring you money? Well, no. Okay, well, why would you do that?
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm a woman, so maybe, yeah, it's easier for me to make art because I don't have to provide for the family.
Yeah.
So it's embraced because maybe I'm doing the art.
Mm-hmm.
And for the kids to learn also how to do the basic skills.
Yeah.
To be proud of what they can do.
Yeah.
In the skill level or in technique. And the public and the state, they have a different perspective on art, more like an international view.
Mm-hmm.
So I've tried to see how I can make art about my own heritage, my roots.
Yeah.
And when I do ceramic, it's all functional.
Yeah.
And the only satisfaction, why do I make this? Why do I make this? Is because the roots of being a Mennonite is so functional, practical.
Yeah.
And there's also the sense of you want to support yourself financially.
Yeah.
Making some functional art you can sell it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also it's been a way to introduce the handmade or the artisan level of making something be more appreciated. Because, oh, you made this? Then it becomes a totally different, why did you make this? And that's amazing. And how did you make this?
Yeah.
Especially with ceramics, because I tell them this is from blood. It's from the earth.
Yeah.
And now it's glass, it's petrified. But that is unbelievable. And it's also skill level. It's not something a woman would do, is be in your laboratory of chemistry of the earth and play with temperature.
Yeah.
So there is this amazement of and wonderment of, wow, she made this.
Yeah.
And I would like my kid to learn. And so some kids have made their cups and now they drink from it, and that's an incredible experience for them every time.
Yeah, yeah.
So it would be great to see one day have those workshops maybe in schools, or have schools come to my studio and kids can get introduced to what artists do and why they make it. There's also a cultural side to it. It's not to become wealthy and rich. There's always an important side to why you make art.
Yeah.
Talk about your culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we don't have a lot of artists that represent our culture here locally. So I'm starting to see the need to lay a foundation, to be more practical in the beginning.
Yeah.
Like I love abstract art, and
I
have made conceptual art.
Yeah.
And nobody takes an interest in that because it's personal and it's, I painted it because I needed to paint it. But when they say, oh, is there any art in the Campos, or is there art about the Campos? It's always an outsider painting the landscapes or the daily life of a woman or a man, a farmer. So I feel like I need to at least have one series of just the basic butter dish and the big noodle soup bowl and the faspa things that making it makes me think about memories and other people have started to engage, and it's interesting. You think, oh no, it's too functional. You can't call this art. It's just pottery. But it has an artistic side to it. Yeah. And the paintings, I've been painting portraits and using the line drawing of the children's books. Yeah. And sometimes the proportions are just like the children's book. They're not realistic. They're not Leonardo da Vinci. Yeah. For a reason. I can show that I can do proper proportions, but I don't need to. And because I want to have the basic art that is so primitive as drawing those children's books that have almost the Egyptian profile of the faces, and the floor has a different perspective, and the stove on the floor is another perspective. And most people will say, why did this is out of proportion. But it's almost, I want to get that into my paintings these days. Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because my early paintings have more proportion and realism, but it's not about that. It's recreating new scenes of the children's books into my art now. Yeah, absolutely. Respecting that. And the coloring books are very interesting, and you can never find an author here. So you don't know who drew this coloring book. Yeah. And that person drew 70 beautiful drawings.
Yeah.
And there's no name to it. It's just the name of the printer who printed the book, and nowhere to be found, the artist. So I want to make something, say something about that too. Whereas the artists and the people who do this need to be recognized.
Yeah. I guess that's one of those things with the sort of like the cultural, like shying away from like things that might be seen as like prideful or
you're showing off your talent.
Yeah.
Especially with art. I don't know why it's so, I don't want you to see it. Did you do it? Yes. But it's nothing great. It's nothing perfect. And that's why I like to paint in that sense of this face is not proportional. It doesn't have to look like that. And I want it to hang on a wall and be celebrated.
Yeah.
And if they ask me why, and this is all you can do, or this is as good you can draw, I will perhaps do something to prove that I can draw very realistic as well.
Yeah.
But it doesn't satisfy me. There has to be this, why do I do this?
Exactly.
Like this, I'm often like this. The 3 girls that I painted recently, they don't really have the legs. It's just movement.
Yeah.
So this girl doesn't have her second leg. I'm like, that's not what this painting is about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I tried to have that in there, but at the same time, it's still real, like a realistic kind of painting, and not necessarily. Yeah, it's supposed to ask a question, not just this is what it is.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like kind of like putting like the body back in the artist, or like the identity like back into the artist,
and the female. The female. Well, in the coloring books, it's usually the activities of the woman that are being drawn. Yeah. And also the farm. A lot of farm work, but the women's work is celebrated in the coloring books. Yeah. But in ordinary life, their work isn't celebrated. Yeah. So, and recently with, 2 days ago was Women's Day, and someone said, I do not celebrate homemaking as part of Women's Day. And I was just painting a homemaking scene, and I thought, that's interesting that I noticed this comment that someone made, not about my art, but they said, I will not encourage women to cook and be in the kitchen, and nor do I. But I know that most of them are, and they should be appreciated for it. Yeah, absolutely. It shouldn't be taken for granted. Yeah. And the idea too is we learn how to grow our food from scratch. And nowadays, it's not being done because it's considered old-fashioned. Yeah. But then we replace processed foods, and we still prepare it in the kitchen because most women still stay at home. So I find it more interesting that if you are at home, and that's the norm that the women have here, which I think it should be by choice, but it would be great, to be in touch with earth and plant your food like our grandmothers did, and appreciate the artisan process that was once a necessity, but now it's a luxury. But you can prevent a lot of, basic conditions and better health for everyone if you're doing it anyways. So whoever is doing it, that's kind of, I appreciate it and celebrate it. But no, I don't say that the woman should be in the kitchen. Yeah. But I just respect definitely their choice of still using the artisan process. Yeah. Because somebody still has to do the cooking, and nowadays the quality isn't, it's so over-processed and commercialized. Yeah. And in my community, the women are not working. So what are they doing with their time? They're not working, they raise children. So there's not a lot of options often. So I wish the artisan process in the food would be preserved. Yeah. That would be something that that's why I make my ceramics. Like, look, I made it from scratch, and it's very cool. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, like that framing that you were having of domestic work as creative work is being the producer rather than a consumer. And so it's interesting how a lot of like these ideas kind of like coming back around, like in like, in terms of like sustainability, like all these ideas that are supposedly new and groundbreaking, but these
going back to this domestic work.
Exactly. And when you look at, well, if you're a consumer in Vancouver, for example, the hip thing is to be sustainable, to appreciate where things come from. A lot of, like a stereotype, the hippie knows where the food was grown, knows how to read the labels, because not everybody can grow food, but we know how to read labels and know what's in our food. That's something I was also introduced to in Vancouver.
Yeah.
And then I started to appreciate all the things my mom taught me.
Yeah.
Because look, I know how to make this. I know how to make bread. And there's these courses, workshops, how to make bread, how to do this and how to do that. Which I think, wow, that's so cool, because everyone thinks it's the greatest and latest thing to know how to do things.
Yeah.
And we were taught all that.
Yeah.
Forbidden school, but we had our own way of school at home. That I think is great.
Yeah.
Like I love that my mom taught me how to bake bread.
Yeah.
Because in my case, I loved it, but not every woman likes to do it. Not everyone has the tendency to like the cooking. And so I have times where I hate cooking.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh, if I had to do this right now, I would just be very sad.
Yeah.
But when you put a different side to it, and that is sustainable and less plastic and less containers, we have more land here than we need. So there's so much opportunities here.
Yeah.
And my neighbor here in Campo 10, a lady, she always makes a big garden. So I get my herbs and strawberries sometimes, and she says, my neighbor lady tells me that I'm insane and crazy that I still make a garden, because nowadays you can buy everything in cans and packaged. Yeah. And using the fake and artificial seems to be a better choice than the real. Yeah. I know it's coming back, it's turning around again, but for, well, several generations here, they believe that the store-bought product it shows your status, that you are well off, that you can have a better life. Yeah. But the women still stay at home and are at home all day. Yeah. And I find that we have a lot more depression nowadays than we had when we grew our food and we were in touch with nature. Yeah. If it's not replacing one job with the other, like the woman still stays at home. Yeah. It's just that now she uses the cans and the artificial and special colors in there and that kind of stuff. Yeah. So, if education was embraced, yes. Let's go all to school. That would be great. Yeah. That's number one.
So tell us a little bit about some of your favorite artists and what advice that you would give to girls and women in conservative communities who want to make art.
Well, I wish I had known about a famous artist when I grew up. Not even Van Gogh. And he comes from Friesland, where we Mennonites come from. Yeah. So it's strange how that has never been part of upbringing. Yeah. I don't even think now there's an art class in the Campos, in the private schools that have even the artist lists. Yeah. And I believe a lot of it is because when you look through art history, you see more female nude than not. For sure. So I think it's the female nude that's limiting the art history in schools. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's from the world, it's bad, and our kids are not supposed to draw that. Yeah. Because it was an issue when I had to draw the female nude. Yeah. I did it. I didn't tell anybody that it was part of my drawing class. Yeah. Life drawing. Yeah. Which was great. I felt really accomplished that I got over myself and just participated in the class. Yeah. And I believe that's probably the reason why we don't have art in the schools. Yeah. Or because we are too practical and functional. And so that's why we never learn about famous artists and names. Yeah. And I still think it's important to have references to artists. Because my first painting was the Rocky Mountains or a tiger in the jungle. And that's what everybody still paints. Because it's challenging and you really have to know how you do this. It's skill, but it's nothing local. It's not a topic that happens around here. because once I wasn't competing from the public school to the paint, and I didn't even know why I painted the scene, but I won my first prize.
Yeah.
So I could go into the state and compete, and I did a great job. But I painted a tiger in the jungle.
Yeah.
And the guy that won, he painted Chihuahua scene with the ceramics of Mata Ortiz.
Yeah.
And I said, why did this guy win and look at my tiger? So much better.
Yeah.
And then I was explained, well, you're a Mennonita and you didn't paint, you painted a tiger from India.
Yeah.
This bright jungle and the special type of tiger that I copied from some magazine book. And then I learned, well, that's true. And my first drawing had been a watercolor of a farm, but it had been a little tiny cross-stitch advertising from a Sears catalog of my auntie.
Yeah.
And I enlarged it, and it was a farm with chickens.
Yeah.
It could have been a Mennonite farm, and now I understand why I won that.
Yeah.
But then I went to paint the tiger because I didn't know why I was painting anything.
Yeah.
And no one in school, not even in public school, did we have art.
Yeah.
Small town.
Yeah.
A lot of it is small town.
Yeah.
We don't need it. We live off the land, and the art is not a necessity. So I would encourage, in the sense of art, is why do we make art, and make art about our daily activities in life.
That art doesn't have to be like from somewhere else. Yeah.
It's not necessary to bring in the art history, yes, but only if it teaches you to ask, why are you doing the things you're doing?
Yeah.
That's why the artist painted a certain painting. That's why it became famous, and why do we paint, and where do we live?
Yeah.
So that's why the Plotich Kunst last year, and I was invited to participate in a median conference, and there was introduced the arts, the visual arts, and how to paint in Plotich.
Yeah.
And the question was, do we have Plotich Kunst? We don't. And the only the references that we had was the coloring books and the front cover illustration, and maybe an old box, wooden box that would have a little bit of drawing, and the tea towels. And so the concept now is I want to focus on painting about our daily lives and what it is to be Plotich and living in the Mennonite communities, so that outsiders can not just hear written stories, they can also see visual art. And that's, we were going to start a group in class soon too, and it will be adults and youth to paint Plotich.
Yeah.
We will see what we come up with. But it will be celebrating the everyday life.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of what we are. It is a stereotype, but it is really truly what we are here.
Yeah.
Our daily life.
Yeah. So what are some of your long-term goals as an artist, educator, and community worker?
Well, basically, the Plotich Kunst, because yes, I could be making a lot of individual art exhibitions now that I finally have my foot in the scene. But I feel that I need to at least have a basis of my Plotich roots.
Yeah.
The identity of an artist, but also the woman perspective, and encourage other in my community to paint, not just to be admired about what I do, what I can do, to share it with people who are interested in it. And maybe in a few years we will have others who can teach and educate. Yeah. And then I can move on and exhibit more different kinds of art. Yeah. Maybe in a conceptual form, but still about the same topic. Yeah. But just differently, not as literal.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So for many people, life in the Campos has changed dramatically, even in just a few years. In what way are your experiences different from your parents' and grandparents' generations?
I think that often I think, I didn't have choices, and it's true. A lot of choices that were made in my life were only options, and you had to make a choice with the few options you were given. And in my parents' sense, they had a role, like literally cut out for them. They needed to. They knew they were going to be housewives. My mom, and she knew she was going to have children. She knew that her children were possibly going to do the same things. Yeah. Because in those years, it was all about surviving, and it was maybe in general in the world. Yeah. In the 1920s, like my grandparents, the role was surviving. Yeah. My grandma had a huge garden, and it wasn't for fun or for pleasure or a choice. They had to do it to survive. Yeah. And she had a garden until her 70s, because it was part of her life, and she would provide. And for the men, it was the same thing. It was harsh, and they had to provide. So the role was to be a farmer or a carpenter. And the businessman was not embraced until my dad's generation. So my dad is one of the first and very successful businessmen. Naturally a talent for it. And now a lot of Mennonite men are businessmen. Yeah. And the women in the majority are still homemakers. Yeah. There's a few that have gone to school, and they do struggle with the gender roles. Yeah. Because it's hard to be accepted, or hard to get a job in the community and be respected that you have a degree in something, but you're still a woman, and they just want to give you the very low jobs when you're overqualified for something. Yeah. So now we can at least make decisions. Yeah. I could still decide that I really wanted to study, even though I was prohibited for many years. But if I really insisted, I could. Yeah. So that's what happened for me at the always late, but still insisted. And if I have a dream, there's a way to make it happen. I'm not stuck. Yeah. And we have more options for our generations. Yeah. And I encourage a lot of young kids to do the education. It's not just ending up with a degree and say, okay, I can do all this now. I've learned all this. Or just because I can do it. It's also the teamwork and learning how to work with other people. Yeah. And people who think different than what we have thought. Yeah. Here we're in a bubble. And usually everyone knows what's the common thing. And everything that's not common, that's so awkward. Yeah. I don't even know what that means, because I grew up isolated. Yeah. I didn't know what was common. And then in Canada, I was standing on my own all the time. Now I'm also in Chihuahua. I'm always the only one that goes to a certain type of concert or an art show opening. I'm the only Mennonita there all the time. Yeah. Why? Because, for the most people here would be, that's too awkward to go there. Yeah. I don't think about it. Yeah. But learning how to think differently and work with other people, that's what happens when you do have some university school. Yeah. Or education, you learn to work with very different people. And I think that's what we need here. Yeah. Don't need to all be accountants and have a certain job. It's just the teamwork. Yeah. And not give up on a team right away when something is awkward. Yeah. Learn how to work it out. And that is an experience that we don't have here in the community. That we do need desperately. Yeah. To make events, because no one wants to be the leader or do something because they don't want to tell someone what to do. Yeah. They don't know how to delegate and be a manager. And it's because no one of us really works for a boss other than a Mennonite boss. So it's a different dynamic working in the Campos than working in a city. Yeah, exactly. Or in Canada, when you do have you know what the word manager means. Yeah, exactly. So what are some of the ways that you've seen interactions between mestizos and Mennonites change during your lifetime? Well, we have embraced that we need the mestizos for a lot of jobs. Like we need them for accountants, we need them for doctors, because we don't have any qualified professions. Yeah. We don't even have agricultural engineers who can help us teach us how to grow our food, what supplements to use. Yeah. We rely on the mestizos for most of that, which in some cases is often being abused. I believe our Campos are a bit of guinea pigs for some big name fertilizers who think, we need to practice, see how this works on crops.
Yeah.
And the Mennonites will not ask any questions. We can do a lot of tests here.
Yeah.
And we don't know how to work safe and the hazards of using certain products.
Yeah.
We don't wear gloves or masks to apply certain products.
Yeah.
Which I've learned through my laboratory.
Yeah.
I have that job where I was very aware that you have to protect yourself, and I see a lot of carelessness here, and it worries me. It worries me in an environmental sense and personal protection.
Yeah.
And that would be so great to have an engineer that is plot-teach and can say to the family, look, maybe we should work like this. And once one family starts, everyone will follow.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when the Mexa says it, then no, it's not. It doesn't have the same value.
Yeah.
Because it's a foreign comment.
Yeah.
So that would be great to have more professions in our own community.
Yeah.
To have that. Yeah, and the women, when they go to the doctors, they need to take their daughters or someone who speaks Spanish to say what their symptoms are.
Yeah.
And it's often misunderstood, and there's the wrong medications being prescribed because it's not being communicated properly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we need more professions. And it is happening. We have more, we have nurses now, we have a few accountants, we have several architects, we have quite a few graphic designers and product designers even, which is great. Now we're starting to admire the Mennonites for wow, they do have learned something. Yeah. It all encourages to go and have an education.
Yeah.
And the interactiveness with, it's a different culture even 2 hours from here. Going to Chihuahua is a culture shock for most people.
Yeah.
For young kids who go to school. Because it's a different world.
Yeah.
Not so much now anymore than 10 years ago. It was a culture shock because here we're in a bubble.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So to kind of close this out, the name of this project is Rebels, Exiles, and Bridge Builders. Which of these words, if any, would you use to describe your cross-cultural interactions, and why?
All of them.
Yeah.
And intensely for periods of time.
Yeah.
Probably a decade of rebel and a decade of exile.
Yeah.
And now a few years, not a decade, but a few years of bridge building.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that was the art. The arts made me. The art was not the reason I was a rebel. Art was not the reason I was in exile. But art was the reason I was able to deal with it all and have a way to still communicate in a way to the people who see me as the rebel and who say you're excommunicated for this and for that.
Yeah.
That art has taught me how to think how they do and then communicate with my perspectives and say, look, I make this, and especially doing the FASPA sets in art. It shows them that I appreciate their culture and their values and the reasons why they do it. I don't just have a degree and then come back and I'm a feminazi. Which they did call me once. And a few times, and they've called me Greenpeace. All of that is an honor to me, but for them it's an insult. Because like I care about the environment and they say, well, the environment adapts to all the changes that we have and pollution levels, we don't have to do anything about it. And but you can talk about it in a different way. And with your art, you can somehow it works. It's amazing. Because I didn't have any expectations of being a bridge builder. I just wanted to make my art, but it's happened on its own. And it's been the art. And it's been the FASPA sets. And the needles of bowls that have created some kind of admiration and appreciation for me as a person.
Absolutely.
And moms and well, even some educators from schools wanting me to show that and share that. It's been an honor for me. And I think that's why I'm willing to do the Plot-teacher Kunst. So that, I can can close a good chapter.
Yeah.
Not just like I love my abstract art, but then if I come back and just do abstract art, I will be the isolated person for the rest of my life here in the Campos.
Yeah.
So I felt the need to start with something, and even in the community of Cuauhtemoc and Chihuahua, we are very traditional in art still.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of conceptual and, well, the things that are happening in the cosmopolitan cities. So who draws very beautifully and with a great sense of detail and technicality, perfect proportions, they are the great artists. And here, if we have no grounds in art, well, then I start with FASPA sets. Because also we have had a lot of stress here. Cultural shocks, but also other types of stress. I find that ceramic calms me down. So I use the art therapy. And I don't care so much what I make about. And then if I can sell the cup and the plate, even better. And it's attracted other, like an audience.
Absolutely.
And the audience that I do want to attract, which are the Plotić and the community. So I've learned something from using the art therapy and making functional pottery items. But draw some Mennonite topics on it, or have a reason, why do I color it like this, or why do I do this? Then it becomes a bit more art.
Absolutely.
So I've been invited to several events in the community from the government, but also in the community. So I think I'm in the stage of the bridge building. So, which helps me heal a lot of the other experiences that I've had.
Absolutely.
Because excommunication was a very, very hard stage. And not for being an artist, just for being a woman who asks why, or she wants to make her own decisions. Then no, you're not supposed to ask them. And in art school, it taught me it was okay to ask a question. So you learn how to be okay with these things and how to apply them in the now. When you're a person with more experience, life experience.
Thank you so much for having this conversation.
Well, thank you, Abby, for asking me.